Coming up on 101 West. A May 28th explosion in the heart of downtown Youngstown at the Realty building left 1 dead and 9 injured. All that remains of the century-old building is demolition rubble after Coming up on 101 West. A May 28th explosion in the heart of downtown Youngstown at the Realty building left 1 dead and 9 injured. All that remains of the century-old building is demolition rubble after workers cut into a natural gas line under a city sidewalk. Natural gas accidents like this happen more often than you think. Experts we sought out, including the NTSB, say the lack of state and federal safety regulations is to blame. Could it happen again? What needs to change to stop the danger beneath us? 101 West starts right now. Good evening and welcome to 101 West, a news program produced here at the 21 News Studios at 101 West Boardman Street. This news program goes in depth into issues facing the Mahoning and Shenango valleys. Tonight, we go back about 3.5 months to a much more comfortable afternoon in May. We are just getting back from enjoying a long Memorial Day weekend when the Realty building exploded, killing a young man and injuring several others. And even though it may sound cliche, that explosion in downtown Youngstown rocked the city. It rocked its foundation, it rocked our nerves, and it rocked the spirit of the city. We know it was caused by work being done on what was thought to be an abandoned gas line, and now we have uncovered that these types of explosions are becoming more common. Now, those reasons and specifics in a minute, but first, how the Realty building became no more.
Well, hi there, everyone. Sure was a beautiful start to our day.
Hey, you got the Chase building just blew up downtown.
Yeah, there's a gas leak in right next to the Chase bank.
There's been an explosion in the building.
Any cars available for traffic? We had a gas explosion, 47 Central Square.
See multiple ambulances at this location. We got victims, sub-level, trapped.
They believe that there may be people inside.
I'm buried in.
We got civilians over here screaming for help. Could be the rest of the trucks in the city.
All companies, all fire departments, ladders, respond for a gas explosion, multiple victims.
What can we do to help?
Well, there were people in the bank. We got some coming out now.
Let's get some cars to shut down the Market Street Bridge and get all the bridges downtown shut down.
We need a ladder, another ladder.
My daughter called me. She's in the building. She's trapped in the bathroom on the first floor.
Grab her, grab her. All right. Got her? I got her. You okay?
They may have to be trapped underwater. They can't get into the water because of the electric service. This has been an hour, and we're going on 1 hour and 20 minutes now waiting for Ohio Edison to respond to turn off this electric to this building where there has been an explosion. There's part of the building missing. This is a critical incident. We need somebody to respond yesterday.
They were injured bodies bleeding from their faces and their legs. They were pulling them on stretchers.
Get everybody back from that building.
And we are coming on the air tonight with breaking news. This video shows the moment a downtown Youngstown building exploded.
As of about 30 minutes ago, we learned that gas was still coming from the area. They evacuated the entire building. They were able to evacuate international towers.
When this is over, downtown, the center downtown will be shut down. completely shut down. No traffic in and out, nobody around because of the potential for a structural collapse.
And for the past few months, we've been showing you the demolition of the Realty building. The 100-year-old building is now gone. One bank employee, 27-year-old Akil Drake, died in that blast. The NTSB's initial reports point to a worker who cut into an active gas line. It's that preliminary cause which is at the heart of our program tonight. How often do natural gas explosions occur, and more importantly, why? What laws exist to keep this from happening? You'll be surprised at the answer to that question. Madison Tromler takes a closer look at the millions of miles of natural gas lines running across the country. It's an under-regulated industry, and it's the danger beneath us.
Multiple people trapped in the basement. Rescued one, we're working on a second.
People don't get just how dangerous natural gas can be because they've become comfortable with it.
On May 28, 2024, a natural gas explosion shook downtown Youngstown. The explosion left 1 man dead, 9 injured, and displaced nearly 200 people living in and around the Realty building. While the cause behind this explosion remains under investigation, what we do know is the city of Youngstown contracted with local construction company Greenheart to prep for a city road project. During the time of the explosion, a project was underway to remove and relocate utility lines under the sidewalk in the Realty basement area. The blast happened around 2:44 in the afternoon, and early findings uncovered 4 workers hired by Greenheart cut into a pressurized natural gas line with a saw. After the deadly blast, a worker told investigators the crew was under the impression the gas line was dead. At least that's what they were told. If there's enough natural gas building up in a confined space, a single spark is enough to cause an explosion. Minutes after cutting into that line, an explosion. The impact still being felt months later. What happened in Youngstown is raising questions over how this could happen and why Youngstown is not alone.
There's a long history of natural gas explosions within residential buildings as well as in commercial.
August 2024, Bel Air, Maryland. A natural gas explosion kills 2. Gas and electric workers were in the neighborhood responding to an electrical issue before the explosion, and people reported a gas odor. January 2024, Fort Worth, Texas. 21 people injured in a hotel explosion. Natural gas blew out the first 2 floors. There was reportedly a gas leak as construction was ongoing. November 2016, Canton, Illinois. 1 person killed and 11 hurt after a commercial building exploded. NTSB found the cause to be a third-party contractor striking a gas line while installing fiber optics cable. March 2014, East Harlem, New York.
This is a tragedy of the worst kind.
8 people killed and almost 50 injured after an explosion and fire destroyed 2 adjacent multi-use buildings. 100 families displaced. An investigation revealed failures by both the gas operator's contractor and the city during years prior. December 1972, Boardman, Ohio, on 680. 1 person killed, 7 injured after a worker struck a line during construction. February 1985, Sharpsville, Pennsylvania. 2 dead after reports of a gas smell. November 1986, McDonald, Ohio. A natural gas line in a 30-block neighborhood malfunctions, sending surging gas through households. An eruption of fires rips through over 30 homes and a business, leaving $1 million in extensive damage. January 1990, Youngstown, Ohio. On YSU's campus, the explosion sent flames 100 feet into the air. The fire chief said a contractor struck a gas line.
I've seen city blocks disappear. All right, well, again, I'm not here to scare anybody. Natural gas in the right or wrong environment can be quite dangerous if not respected. All right? And if you don't respect it and it gets confined, some very bad things can happen.
The individual factors behind each of these explosions and what exactly led up to them is complex. One way or another, it usually comes down to human error, whether that's failures by the gas operator, someone hired by the operator, or failures by a third party contracted by some other entity. Third-party damage is a leading cause of natural gas explosions and a key concern in the Youngstown explosion.
Well, they all certainly are factors, and when we look at damage to pipelines and failures from damage, you have two categories to look at. One is the immediate damage. So when a line is cut to the point that it leaks immediately, that's one situation. The other situation is when a pipe is dented or gouged, but it doesn't leak. And those can be unrepaired and sit for many years before they become a problem. On some level, every accident is human error, because a human at some point in time made a decision that ultimately resulted in the accident.
Often, it's a series of failures. For example, in the East Harlem deadly explosion, it was not just the gas operator's failures, but also a city sewer line that was left unrepaired for at least 8 years. Another time we see a series of failures, 2018 in Dallas. Work from decades prior left a slow accumulation of gas. That then led to a leak, which was not detected during an inspection just 2 days before a house exploded, killing a child.
In my many investigations over the last 25 plus years, these aren't one-off accidents. There's a series of failures that have occurred that inadvertently get linked in such a manner that the linkage causes this catastrophic event.
The Department of Transportation agrees. Severe excavation damage results in an immediate release, while less severe damage can weaken a pipe and contribute to a future pipeline failure. Over the past 20 years, natural gas explosions have caused more than $5.5 billion in damage. Distribution lines span over 2.3 million miles across the U.S., outstripping any other country. The majority of damage happening on gas lines that run through cities and streets, delivering to homes and businesses.
So just how hard is it to keep track of all of that?
It is difficult. There are more miles of pipeline in the United States than there are miles of paved road.
Yet, most people don't even know the natural gas lines are there. But how could we? Pipelines are older than records and regulations.
The natural gas legislation that really started the federal regulation started in 1968. There were gas systems going back, to the previous century. At that point in time, you had kind of grandfathered in all of these gas systems, and so it's the records problem is really dealing with a lot of that old infrastructure that's in the ground. It's an enormous task to keep track of all that. And in the past, records have not been well maintained or did not exist.
Utility operators do maintain maps of where their property of natural gas lines are, but this is not public record. And operators won't necessarily have a record of every single gas line underground since the 1800s. As we've grown as a country, U.S. population, technology, and activity continues to increase, which means utility lines do too.
It's not a new concern, but it's becoming more because we've got more population density, more activity, a lot of stuff going on. The telecommunication networks are going in, they bore next to the lines. So it's just it doesn't surprise me on distribution systems in many states that third-party damage is the greatest cause of hazardous grade 1 leaks on their system.
Because gas lines are older than the standards, the risk of people making mistakes that affect these lines is heightened over the lack of regulation and public awareness. Individual states must follow federal minimum standards, but do have the ability to go further and impose stricter standards. Oftentimes, they do not. For example, in many states, including Ohio, excavators or third-party workers are not required to have a license. Beyond that, there are ways around the laws.
Magic word, exemptions. What's the end result of that type of lax oversight is an explosion and unnecessary death.
So what are the holes in the regulation? You've seen the commercials. It's simple. In Ohio, you are asked to call 811 before you dig. Whether you're putting in an in-ground pool or a septic system like this homeowner, Ohioans must call 811 to get utility lines marked before those excavators can dig. Loophole number 1. In the case of the Realty building explosion, that was not considered excavation under Ohio law, even though they were working underground. Loophole number 2. A communication breakdown made it so that even if the lines were identified beforehand, the workers may not have known there was gas in the line. Loophole number 3. No clear record keeping of the lines. Again, in the case of the Realty building, it's unclear who was responsible for the line because 1 foot one way, it's the gas company's responsibility, and a foot the other way, it's the building owner's responsibility. The United States Department of Transportation's Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration says eliminating the call before you dig exemptions that some states still allow is a top priority.
An exemption is a license to kill, particularly in the gas industry, because if the lines are dug and struck, you know what the result is going to be. So the state government and the local governments need to do more to protect their citizens with the amount of gas under the lines, under the streets, going into homes and all the communities. The problem you have is most citizens are unaware where gas lines are.
Most property owners, most homeowners, most of the people, business owners, don't realize that they own some of that infrastructure underneath their feet. How would they?
The bottom line is utility companies get sold over time and records can get lost. Dominion East Ohio was sold to Enbridge 3 months before the Realty explosion. Avoiding third-party disruption of old, unknown gas lines while managing new ones is becoming a larger problem because we don't know what lies beneath. Over time, old pipes corrode, new materials are used, and new companies come in, creating inconsistency with how gas lines have been constructed and maintained. 200 years later, Ohio still does not have a uniform standard for natural gas line construction.
What does that mean? That means that it could be anything out there. As a matter of course, if there was a law that required this, and everybody was installing these things to the same standards, 10, 15, 20 years from now, we would not have some of these issues that we have today.
Some of the safety measures being called for include requirement of natural gas detectors in homes and buildings, updated technology, stricter enforcement, and better reporting across the board. So why don't we have these measures? Former NTSB Chair Jim Hall says it comes down to a pushback from the industry over the cost.
The lack of oversight, the lack of citizen activity and support, the lack of funding affects all of these things. In most cases, it's a question of nobody's responsible. No one's accountable. This goes to the federal government or this is the state government, or we can't do that because there is an exemption.
Plus, the danger is easy to ignore.
Pipelines are in the ground, they're out of sight. There are safety concerns because they are carrying explosive product that can cause death, such as the situation in Youngstown.
It's the carrying of that explosive product that has caught the eye of the National Transportation Safety Board. NTSB members were on the ground in Youngstown that night, combing through the debris. Now, what exactly were they looking for and why? Madison Tromler traveled to our nation's capital to find out.
You've mentioned that it's the presence of third-party workers that prompted the natural gas investigation in Youngstown. Why is that?
We have jurisdiction over transportation and not just natural gas, but other sorts of commodities are transported through pipelines. So we do have jurisdiction, investigatory jurisdiction over pipeline incidents and accidents. We were there because of the apparent involvement of third-party work being done in the vicinity of transmission lines. That is a very common cause of explosions when it comes to gas transmission lines. It appears that what happened was that contract workers were cutting away what they thought were old, inactive pipes in a vault underneath the sidewalk area, and they cut into a pipe that they had no knowledge of was actually pressurized at the time. It was an old pipe, it was still pressurized. We're still investigating to determine why that was the case.
How rare is that to see a situation where it was thought to be abandoned and it was pressurized?
Yeah, I think it's pretty rare. I think it's a pretty unusual circumstance.
Do you think in a situation like this, it should be required by law that the people doing work, for example, in the Youngstown building should have been required by law to call before doing that work?
What we would say is whether it's required or not, do your homework. Make sure you know what you're doing, where you're digging. The Youngstown situation is a pretty unique situation, and I don't want to go too far into that because we're still trying to determine what happened. I don't know that calling in advance would have made a difference there. They knew where the pipes were. They were seeking to remove those pipes. So what we're trying to find out is why that happened.
Do you think that there should be more statewide or federal regulation in regards to pipeline safety?
There's a good bit of regulation already. Some of what we see as common occurrences, again with excavation, it's people doing things. There are certain sorts of scenarios that are very common, and excavation, third-party excavation is certainly one of those. But I will tell you, one of the things that people can do that we recommend that's very, very important is to install methane detectors in their homes. We all have a lot of sensitivity these days to the importance of smoke detectors. Increasingly, people are aware of the importance of carbon monoxide detectors in their homes. Methane detectors are available. They detect natural gas in advance of it becoming a problem. They are available. They're increasingly affordable and increasingly effective. We've recommended since about 2016 that they be required.
What are some of the other changes that the other recommendations that NTSB has been calling for?
Well, one of the most important things that we have recommended has to do with those that are actually operating these distribution lines, pipelines, and that is something called safety management systems. This is not unique to the pipeline community. This is something that's important with respect to transportation safety broadly. It's a top-to-bottom approach to safety, and what it does is, when it's working at its best, what it does is it ensures that everyone in the organization is aware of safety, aware of safety risks, identifies safety risks, communicates those risks, that there's an assessment when new risks are identified. This is something that we've actually recommended be required on a national basis, and that would come through PHMSA, the Pipeline Hazardous Materials Safety Administration.
This is infrastructure that is very old and complex. How challenging is it to track this all?
Yeah, it is challenging. There's two types of pipelines. There's transmission lines, which do exactly what they sound like. They're transporting not just gas, but other commodities from point to point, and then there are distribution lines, and those are what they sound like. Those are the lines that bring natural gas to your home or to your commercial enterprise. It is a complex system. Some of that infrastructure is old. It requires maintenance. It requires constant attention to ensure that we're maintaining the integrity of those systems. It is a challenge, no question about it.
What is the NTSB's investigatory process that it's going through? If you can just take me back from day one, after the explosion, up until the end, can you lay out the process?
Yes, it's a very meticulous process. The first thing we do is try to secure the site, secure the evidence necessary to determine what happened. We engage in a very thorough interview process with those involved. We actually were doing interviews at the time I was out there. There is follow-up to those interviews if it's necessary or appropriate. There's a lot of work done to analyze materials. We have some amazing people who are able to determine sometimes very, very difficult facts based upon a review or analysis of the materials involved. So that is all going on over a period of months. Then we bring all that factual evidence together. There's a complex process that we engage in here internally involving multiple departments where we analyze the facts. We essentially try to distill things down to their most basic, and then we put all that together into a final report. That final report comes out. We develop recommendations where it's appropriate to help ensure that these things don't happen again.
What are some of the questions that you're asking yourself?
Yeah, our role is to find out what happened and why it happened, and then to make recommendations to help ensure that it won't happen again. One of the big questions is why those gas lines were still pressurized.
Is it frustrating when you do have those potentially life-saving measures that you guys find after doing a thorough investigation and it could prevent these situations? Is it tough to see that when it does take so long for them to be implemented?
It can be frustrating, but we're very, very persistent. We also are realistic. We recognize that sometimes these things do take time. Sometimes they're very complicated and difficult to implement. We've seen some recommendations that have been on the record for many, many years finally come to fruition after sometimes decades, and it's a great sense of satisfaction. And I believe that we'll be able to make some recommendations to help ensure that we're able to avoid this sort of a tragedy in the future.
And of course, the 21 News Watchdog team will be looking for any of those NTSB recommendations that are eventually implemented. Well, that concludes this edition of 101 West. If you want to email us an in-depth topic that you'd like us to investigate, send it to watchdog@wfmj.com. I'm Matt Stone. Have a good night.